we are back. Yes, we are back for another episode of The Real Podcast of Dallas. Yes, The Real Podcast of Dallas. A podcast made for you and you and you. A drug-free podcast. Not a free drug, but a drug-free podcast. Yes, we want to thank you so much for joining us. Yes, this podcast is coming to you from Area 51 and a half. We continue to broadcast from Area 51 and a half. I just want to say hello to Cindy. Hello, Maria. I miss you. We will be back together soon. Meanwhile, we'll show must go on. So how can you find the Real Podcast of Dallas? How can you share it? You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Google Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, Spreaker. You can find it on a lot of platforms. You can Google it. The Real Podcast of Dallas or The Real, depending on where you're looking at. If you are looking at Spotify, it's going to be under The Real. And it's under my name, Leo Gutierrez, or Gutierrez, your host. I hope everybody's doing well. Dallas, I hope you're doing well. People in Puerto Rico, I hope you're doing well. Yeah, family in Puerto Rico, I hope they're doing well. We have a very interesting show today. We're going to talk about a topic. This is a drug-free program. So, you know, we if you look at the past episodes, they all have a theme. It's a mental health platform, but also we deal with prevention, drug prevention, and drug intervention. So, knowing that, one of the topics that I think very important for us to talk about is fentanyl. Fentanyl. Yes. It's gotten unfortunately, very popular, causing a lot of deaths. It was the opiates, and now it's turned to fentanyl. And it's very interesting because I did some work in Dallas years ago with heroin. We were dealing with what they call cheese heroin in the Dallas area. It was unfortunately very popular amongst young kids from 2005 to 2007 where it peaked, and then 2008, 2009, and then it started declining a little bit. And we did a lot of work in that area, you know, concerning heroin, and that's kind of a dark situation for a lot of families. And you know, we worked with a lot of families, and we were able to help families through some programs that we were doing. But one of the interesting things is that while we were working, we started hearing about this drug that was coming up, and it's unfortunate that anytime that you think that you have something under control, especially when it comes to drugs, there's always something else that comes up, and something more powerful. You know, there was K2 with synthetic marijuana that came up, and then let's see, we had black tart heroin. It was also known as cheese. Then you had, at the same time, you had K2 that came out. And of course, marijuana. Marijuana started peaking. For whatever reason, you know, if you think that it's good or whatever, I mean, you know, it has. We did a podcast on marijuana. If you want to catch that one, and I want to revisit that again because there's a lot of things that we could also add to it, to marijuana, especially now that it's become legalized in a lot of states. There's a lot of myths that come with marijuana use. So what we started looking at is, there's different drug trends. And one of the things that we started looking at or started seeing back in 2009, 2010, I started hearing about this drug through people who were in the drug world. And, when drugs first come out, there's a lot of different names. People have different experiences. So it's very difficult to really find out what was going on. So we started, just started taking note. And once I realized what it was called, I would, for those of you who have worked with in the past, that I was very adamant about talking about fentanyl. Because once I realized what fentanyl was, I felt that it was very important for us to really bring it to the forefront. Some people didn't really believe it. And what happens a lot of times is that people don't believe some of the things that are out there, especially with drugs. There's a denial. There's all types of drugs. There's hundreds of drugs if you really start exploring. But it's very interesting because they constantly change. So I'm trying to look for... So I'm going to... Let me get back on track real quick. Let's get some music going. I'm going to... Instead of repeating, it's already been done. So there's the history of fentanyl. It's very interesting, just like the history of K2, if you're familiar with K2, synthetic marijuana, because what happens is that there's a lot of people who do a lot of experimenting with that type of drug, or those types of drugs, synthetic drugs. So we have to be real careful because you never know what you're putting inside your body. Those of you who are in active addiction, you know what I'm talking about. And some of you know through experience about fentanyl and other synthetic drugs that are out there. So I'm going to play for you a history of fentanyl and where that comes from, so you get an idea. Now, this has already been recorded, so this was on the Joe Rogan show, and I remember listening to it a while back, a few years ago actually, and I thought it was very important information. And I think that the person who is on the show, I think he wrote a book, but it's very interesting, so pay attention to it. I'm going to play it, and so I'm going to be quiet and let you listen to it and get an idea where it comes from, and then we're going to discuss it a little bit, only because it's one of those, it's a drug now that's it's an epidemic. And the more we know, the more informed we are, the more we can speak out against it, the more we can help each other out. And if you have a family member who is in active addiction, or if you are in active addiction, please look for help. Go to your nearest hospital. If you are in active addiction and you want help, go to your emergency rooms, ask for help. So I'm going to now switch over and let's get this going. Again, this is on the Joe Rogan show. So I'm giving credit to Mr. Rogan, and here we go. Let's see. And again, you're listening to The Real Podcast of Dallas. The Real Podcast of Dallas.
Upon the story of fentanyl, because weren't you at one point in time, didn't you write about like rap music?
Yeah, I have a book about NWA and Tupac, and I interviewed like Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, all those people. Yeah, but I was the LA Weekly music editor, and I started looking into this story about why people were always dying at raves. So like, I don't know if you remember a few years back, every time there was a rave, there like one person died, two people died, or more. And they always said it was from ecstasy. But I knew that ecstasy was really not that dangerous of a drug. You know, MDMA, pure MDMA, very few people die from that. So I was like, what is going on here? And I looked into it, and it turned out it was all adulterated. It wasn't real ecstasy. It wasn't real Molly. It was adulterated with all these new drugs. And I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I found out that all these new drugs were made in China. They were all synthetic, and there were like hundreds of them. And then it turns out that the most, you know, the worst of them was fentanyl. And that's how I got onto the topic.
And fentanyl, most people think of fentanyl, they think of it as being a new thing. But it's not really a new thing, right? Wasn't it? It was invented in the 50s or something?
Yeah, it was invented by a Belgian chemist. He was trying to find something that worked better than morphine in hospitals.
Doesn't morphine work really good?
Well, it does, but for things like, traditionally, people have gotten a lot of mileage out of morphine. But for things like open heart surgery, he wanted something that came on really fast and it lasted a long time. And so he manipulated the chemical structure of morphine, came up with fentanyl. It was a blockbuster drug, you know, and still is used in hospitals all the time. It's used, you know, there's the fentanyl patch for people with cancer, chronic pain. And then when you get a colonoscopy, they give you fentanyl before that. And then women who have epidurals during childbirth, that I believe is usually fentanyl. So it's still an important hospital drug.
And so how did it come to be that this drug from the 1950s sort of reemerges? And it reemerged during the rave scene? Is that what it was?
It was actually before that. It first started killing people a little bit at the beginning of the 80s. And nobody knew what it was.
And it was from China then as well?
No. Back then, it was these kind of mystery chemists. These guys who... There was this one guy in particular called George Marquardt. And he was like a genius maniac who read all the chemical literature. He learned about fentanyl. He's like, I should try to make this. I bet it would be a hit with recreational users. And so he started making it, and it stumped authorities because these people would die. They would have track marks in their arms, like it was heroin. They would have syringes, but they tested them afterwards, and there was no heroin in their system. And so they're like, what is this? And the only way they finally found out was that there was this scientist testing racing horses. And apparently fentanyl was being used to dope horses.
What?
So they would withstand more pain and would go longer and faster and could
really
train harder. Yeah. And so this guy made the connection. He's like, oh, this is fentanyl. This is this new thing. And he actually predicted what was going to happen. He's like, we are in trouble now because not only is there fentanyl, you can make if you ban fentanyl, you can adjust the molecule, make another type of fentanyl. When they ban that, you make another one, ad infinitum, basically.
Wow. So the thing with horses would be that they would be in pain, so they wouldn't run as hard. So they would force them to run harder by dulling the pain?
I guess so. Yeah, I don't know all the details of